Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field to preview the Week 2 matchup. It will be the home opener for the Green Bay Packers. Green Bay against Indianapolis, Sunday, noon Central Time kickoff at Lambeau Field. And Wes, when you look at this Colts team that's coming in here, coming off a tough loss of their own in Week 1, 29-27 to a division rival in their case, the Houston Texans. The biggest difference, of course, being that they don't have a quarterback injury to deal with like the Packers have. But Anthony Richardson, a young quarterback, a first-round pick last year by the Colts, showing a lot of promise and finding his way. And this is going to be a challenging matchup for certain for the Packers.
Well, if you look at what happened last week and the matchup that they had against the Philadelphia Eagles, in some ways this is such a reflection of that with what you're getting in the Indianapolis Colts, because you have home run hitters on the outside with Michael Pittman Jr. You know, Alec Pierce went off last week.
Yeah.
And certainly, you know, Anthony Richardson, 9 completions for over 200 yards, in addition to being their leading rusher in that game against Houston. It just shows you how dynamic he is. And before the injury last year, I thought he was a guy that had gotten off to a really strong start and had flashed in all the ways that you wanted to see him flash out of the gates. Ultimately, it wasn't enough to win. Ultimately, they weren't able to get Jonathan Taylor going, but many of the same threats that the Packers had to be leery of with the Philadelphia Eagles are also present now with the Colts.
Yeah, Richardson, it's interesting because he just has 5 NFL starts under his belt at this point. But a couple of things to point out with regard to that. In 4 of those 5 starts, he has at least 1 rushing touchdown as a quarterback. So that is definitely something you have to be aware of. And it's certainly something the Packers prepared for, as you mentioned, with Jalen Hurts and the Philadelphia Eagles last week. So you have to believe some of those same concepts from the game plan are going to carry over from Week 1 to Week 2. I pointed this out. You already hinted at it. I pointed it out in our 3 Things video that we shot with Larry on Wednesday after practice. 212 passing yards for Richardson against the Texans, 171 of them on 3 completions. He hit Alec Pierce twice for 50-plus yards. One of those was a 60-plus yard touchdown. And then Ashton Doolin also had a 50-plus yard touchdown in that game. So you have to be wary of the big play against the Colts, because Richardson has shown, even though he is a guy you have to be concerned where he's going to tuck and run, maybe there'll even be some designed runs for him, that kind of thing, he will also step back and let it rip. I mean, he will let it fly and try to gash you deep down the field. And then if nothing's working with Anthony Richardson, they have a guy named Jonathan Taylor they can turn to in the backfield. He, as you said, he wasn't really able to get going against the Texans last week, but we have certainly seen games over the course of his career. When he gets going, he is a tough guy to slow down. He's one of the running backs in this league that can control a game and control tempo from start to finish if that Colts offensive line is winning the line of scrimmage.
It's weird that, like, the thunder and lightning combination that they've kind of built there, with 2 very big human beings relative to their position. In Richardson, you have a guy that's over 6'3", 240 pounds that can run a 4.4. And then in Jonathan Taylor, a guy that really packs a punch at 226 pounds. And, you know, we saw it a number of years ago with him. There was a reason why there was a little bit of that holdout last year, but why it was so important for them to keep him locked down for the long term in this day and age where maybe running backs aren't getting those huge contracts anymore, because he really was the guy that fired that offense for so long. And yeah, they weren't able to get it going against Houston, and credit to the Texans and everything that they've been able to do there and the way they've rebuilt that thing in 1 year's time. It's not an easy front to run against. But all that being said, with Taylor's ability to run between the tackles and Richardson's ability to make things happen with his feet, there's just always that big play waiting to happen. And for Green Bay, and Matt LaFleur talked about it this week, there were so many things they did well in terms of bottling up Jalen Hurts and even to some extent containing Saquon Barkley. But when those guys, specifically Barkley on the ground, found the open lane, found the opportunity, he was able to really capitalize that and make the Packers really pay for their mistakes. That's what you have to avoid with Jonathan Taylor, because, 3 yards in a cloud of dust looks really good coming off of the performance against Houston. But if your linebackers aren't where they need to be, if your gaps aren't being filled, if you're not in the alignment that you really need to be able to execute with, unless you're going to make some open field tackles, it makes your job difficult, and a guy like Jonathan Taylor doesn't make that any easier.
Yeah, when you look at the Packers' performance against the run last week, and specifically against Barkley, 24 for 109, that's a big game for a running back. One of those runs was a 34-yarder, yep. Right? And again, they all count. That's why the average is the average. But I think the other part of it is that 34-yard run by Barkley came in the second half. It's one thing if you kind of slip up in the run defense early and a guy gets an explosive on you. All right, you settle down. You work on bottling him up. When a guy busts a big one in the second half like that, it kind of starts to ruin everything you've done up to that point, right? And certainly on that final drive for the Eagles, they were having their way in controlling the ball. But speaking of the running game, when you look at Indianapolis's defense, this is a unit that gave up 200-plus rushing yards to the Houston Texans, the bulk of those coming from Joe Mixon. And it's not going to be as simple as, the Packers should be able to line up and run the ball against these guys, et cetera, because if the Colts have a bad game like that against the run, they're going to spend all week working on the corrections and working on getting it fixed. And then B, of course, with the Packers most likely turning things over to Malik Willis, the Colts game plan will be, defensively will be based on defending Malik Willis and perhaps trying to say, okay, we're not going to let Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson do what they did against the Eagles and put the ball more in Malik Willis's hands. So, but the way the Packers ran the ball the last 3 quarters against the Eagles, the way the Colts did struggle to defend the run against the Texans, I think that is something to watch very, very closely in this matchup on Sunday at Lambeau.
Yeah, because Joe Mixon being able to get 159 rushing yards and his longest carry in that game was 13 yards just speaks to how you're right about the second half. The Packers gave up that big gash to Barkley. It can be really demoralized, though, on the other aspect of that when a running back just continually in an offensive line manhandles you the way that they did, to be able to have that type of production to average over 5 yards a carry and not have that explosive play that is sort of buoying all those statistics.
Yeah, that was a ground and pound type of performance by Joe Mixon. And we saw him do that in Cincinnati at times too, but he started this 2024 season doing that for Houston, getting a big win over the Colts.
Yeah, and when you look at Indianapolis's defense, and Matt LaFleur was given a ton of credit to Gus Bradley. Certainly that defensive coordinator tree that sprouted from Seattle, the different types of alignments that they had before this Robert Saleh defense kind of took things over in the league, that the Seattle Seahawks were the belle of the ball, and they were the team that was kind of putting all these guys out there. Gus Bradley became a head coach in this league because of that.
Yeah.
This front is interesting in that you have DeForest Buckner, who's been doing it at a high level for so long. He's a face of that defense. They put a lot of resources into acquiring him. You would imagine the mindset in trying to turn that boat around this week is going to be, again, what probably guides not only their game planning, but also their corrections. And so for the Green Bay Packers standpoint, and this is probably veering a little bit too much into the keys to victory of it, but with Josh Jacobs, hopefully everything works out. I believe that was the back injury. That was a back issue that made up limited in practice on Wednesday. But with Josh Jacobs and the motions and the sweeps, the options you have with Jaden Reed, the Packers showed a lot of promising things on the ground against Philadelphia, all things considered, against Vic Fangio and that defense. You have to be able to continue to build upon that with potentially not having the downfield threat of Jordan Love, or at least the consistent threat of Jordan Love in the backfield as far as the signal calling goes. So Josh Jacobs could be the Packers' best friend in this game. And if I'm Green Bay, I see what Mixon did last week. We have our own franchise back here too. If he's available and can take that full allotment of reps, that would be my number one counter to that.
Yeah, and you just wonder how much of the Colts' struggles against the run, against Mixon and against the Texans, how much of that was execution and how much was potentially schematic, because they were more worried about C.J. Stroud and and those Houston receivers beating them downfield, and they gave up a little bit too much against the run. And you know how this can go in games, Wes. Once something like that gets going, yes, you try to make adjustments, but making adjustments is easier said than done, right? I mean, a team gets, Houston gets that running game going with Mixon, and they feel like, okay, we can really lean on this. We can really pound away with this guy to set up everything else we want to do offensively, and it can be tough to stop. So were the Colts' issues more execution? Were they more schematic? Probably a combination of the two, as usual. But again, that's definitely something to watch. I do want to get to our keys to victory here. Oh, one other thing you mentioned DeForest Buckner on this Colts defensive line. I believe they had, was it 4 sacks against the Houston Texans?
Yeah,
and those 4 sacks, that didn't even include a handful of pressures by their rookie first-round pick in that pass rush, Laiatu Latu from UCLA. I believe he played, 30-some snaps, and according to some of the statistical metrics, was credited with 5 pressures.
Yeah,
like 30 snaps. Now he didn't get any sacks. He didn't get anything else on the
bizarre game. 5 pressures, no stats though.
Yeah, he had nothing in the traditional statistics that go into the game book. But 5 pressures and 30 snaps, while his teammates were also racking up 4 sacks.
Yeah,
this is a defensive front that can get some things done. So, but yeah, let's get to some keys to victory here in a minute. But I'll take care of some sponsor business first. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousin Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousin Subs, 50-plus years of better. All right, looking at the Packers and the keys to victory, what's it going to take to pull this game out? Assuming that Malik Willis is the starting quarterback. Matt LaFleur has not officially ruled out Jordan Love. He says the door remains open for him to potentially play at the time that we are taping this episode. We will see what happens by the time we get to the end of the week. But if it is Malik Willis, I think, it's stating the obvious, right? That it puts that much more of a burden on the Packers running game, on Josh Jacobs, on Emmanuel Wilson. You mentioned the change-ups, the end-around stuff with Jaden Reed. The other change-up you potentially throw in here is designing some runs for Malik Willis, which is not something you would do on a regular basis with Jordan Love, but it might be something that's a little bit more of a staple of the game plan with a quarterback like Willis. I think getting, and it's, I mentioned last week, getting that running game going for the play action game and all of that. I think it's not even so much just about the play action game in this matchup. It's about getting the running game going and having that to really be able to lean on throughout the course of the game, the way the Houston Texans leaned on their running game against the Colts last week.
So first and foremost, I do want to show respect to the Colts defensive front, because as you said, Buckner, I thought, got off to a good start last week. Kwity Paye is a guy that could really disrupt a football game if you let him do that. Now, I think the Packers have to feel okay on that side of things, because the guy he'd be lined up against is Zach Tom, who was probably one of the top-performing right tackles in the league last week. When you look at some of the metrics and some of the stats that have come out about that performance, I felt really good about Zach in how he showed out in Brazil. But, I mean, I've been even more impressed watching some of the film and Pro Football Focus and some of these other NFL Next Gen stats talking about how he performed in one-on-one pass coverage. The guy's a hit. Like, he's solid. So you hope that you can go tit for tat with them in the pass game. The run game is where this game's going to be won, though. If you go back to the stats last week, Mike, there were 3 players with double-digit tackles for the Indianapolis Colts in that game. All 3 of them were defensive backs. If you are able to generate that much statistics against the defense, it shows you're doing something well, because it means you're beating the defensive front, it means you're beating the linebackers, and you're forcing them to make tackles at the second and third level of the defense. That's where Green Bay needs to get to. And when they struggled early in that game against the Eagles, it was because they weren't able to get a hat on a hat with a lot of those backers, and things were getting washed out in the front. Being able to build on some of the successes they had in the second half is going to be integral to this victory. The other aspect of it, I think, is going to be the motion. It's going to be the pre-snap stuff. It's going to be working end arounds. It's going to be building pass combinations off of those end arounds. They probably could have gotten to more of that in Brazil, but as I was talking about in our Insider Inbox column, if you watch the game, there was a lot that they developed off of that early Jaden Reed play.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of pass concepts that were built off that. And Tucker Kraft was mentioning this at his locker this week, and that you are going to have opportunities to get open in the passing game, but you got to earn those with what you do in the run game early. And that's what Green Bay is going to have to do in this game to come out with a victory against the Colts.
Well, and you mentioned Kraft. When you look at the one downfield reception he had that broke for a nice big explosive play for the Packers, that's all set up not only by the run and being in the same formation and then running it as a play action pass, but Tucker Kraft is coming off the line of scrimmage and selling that he's blocking the linebacker, right? He's got his head down. He's about to put his arms up like he's going to block, and then like, oh, here I go, bang, and then the ball is on him. He makes the catch. And that's all set up because of what you're doing running the ball. And all of those little things play into getting the execution there. On the defensive side of the ball, just looking at what the Colts did in week 1 against the Texans, and certainly with, mentioning Saquon Barkley busting a 34-yard run against the Packers, A.J. Brown with the 67-yard touchdown on the opening possession of the second half. Packers defense has got to limit the big plays. You can't let Anthony Richardson throw the ball over top of you in this game. And I think defensively, if the Packers limit those big plays and they give themselves more chances to get off the field, they won't get into this real negative time of possession area that they got into against the Eagles over the long run.
You have to make Anthony Richardson pay for the incompletions. I'm not saying you have to pick off every ball, but he was 9-19 in that game with an interception. If he's allowed to get into a rhythm, in a lot of ways it is exactly what happened with Jalen Hurts last week, where he got off to a rough start. Second pass of the game got intercepted by Xavier McKinney. Packers are rolling. You got to be able to not allow him to get into that type of pattern. Now, Hurts is a different type of quarterback in that he is more of a possession-based quarterback. He can throw the ball. And not that Richardson can't, but Richardson, this was sort of his MO last year too. He's a guy that, potentially is going to be like a 55% completion percentage quarterback. It's just the way he plays the position. It's a lot of the downfield stuff he's going to try. Limit the explosive plays. It starts with stopping the run, but limiting the downfield explosives. You cannot let them beat you that way. And I would take notice of what Alec Pierce did, man. I mean, this guy had a lot of buzz coming out of Cincinnati a couple of years ago.
Yep.
People were very excited about him. He was a guy that rose throughout the draft process, ends up going in the second round to the Colts. And if you think about dynamic play from quarterbacks like Richardson in the National Football League, it's what they're able to do with their receivers across the middle. Pierce having that background, that is going to be something Green Bay has to be leery of, whether that's going to be on Keyshawn Nixon or Javon Bullard. The Packers making sure that they don't hurt you in the same way that Houston got hurt in that matchup.
Yeah, there's all that attention on Michael Pittman, and rightly so. He gets the big contract and all that, now becoming a big money, highly paid receiver. But who are the guys that made the big plays for Richardson in week 1? It was Pierce and Doolin, essentially the number 2, number 3 guys, however you want to order them. The other thing I'll say when I look at this game, and obviously, a lot of what we talk about here, you're trying to fix, you're trying to change things from what happened in week 1. The Packers weren't a good team in week 1 in the sudden change instances because, early in the game, the Packers get the 2 turnovers. They're in the red zone. They aren't able to capitalize those. They end up settling for field goals. On the flip side, the one time the Packers turned the ball over, the Green Bay defense didn't respond. And when the Eagles had a short field, 20, 25 yards, whatever it was, 4 or 5 plays, they were in the end zone, had a touchdown. And, so again, when you win the turnover battle 3-1 and be a +2, but the points off takeaways is just 9-7, also +2, that's not going to get it done. And that's where being a better team in the sudden change, both when the sudden change is a positive for you or the sudden change is a negative for you, you have to be able to respond better in those situations. And I thought those situations alone played a huge factor in how the week 1 game against Philly turned out for the Packers.
That was a football game. I mean, it's that simple. It really was. There was a lot of things that the Packers and Eagles kind of erased one another on in terms of both the explosive plays and also the regrettable ones. It isn't also like a game like where the Packers had so many more penalties than the Eagles did. Sure, certainly they ended up winning that side of it. They had more of them, but it wasn't like astronomical.
Yeah.
Everything was relatively even. The total offense in this game was within 4 yards of each other.
Yeah.
With Green Bay coming out on the better half of it. It came down to, as you said, the sudden change, the adversity defense, offense taking advantage of that, punching things in. That's where you have to make sure that you are able to respond the right way. And I think that's also why Xavier McKinney had kind of the message that he did after the game and kind of reiterated it this week at his locker as well, in that there's still a lot of confidence. The Packers defense needs to still remember who it is and still carry itself with that swagger. As I even wrote in the offseason program, everybody's got a plan. The Mike Tyson thing. Everybody's got a plan until you get punched in the mouth.
Right.
Packers took a couple on the chin in Brazil. Can you not allow that to affect you and take this next matchup for what it is and having that short memory?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a big week, a big moment for a bounce back performance from Green Bay's defense, especially considering what's going on the offensive side with Jordan Love most likely missing this game. So before we go, Wes, we'll take a look around at some of the other Week 2 matchups. Thursday Night Football, nothing like a big division matchup right away in Week 2. Buffalo against Miami. Both of these teams pulling off come-from-behind victories in Week 1. Buffalo traveling down to Miami. This is, quite honestly, this is kind of a fun one. Josh Allen against Tua Tagovailoa in Week 2 on Thursday Night Football. It should be pretty entertaining.
Honestly, this has been one of the most fun, if not the most fun division in football the last couple of years, just based on everything that's happened. Certainly you don't have Tom Brady in there anymore, but just seeing how all these other teams have had these different storylines has helped it. Miami is just, they're not the greatest show on turf. I don't want to start that whole thing, but just how exciting that the brand of football they play, it lends itself to prime matchups.
Miami strikes me as this team, and we'll see. The Packers are going to play them obviously Thanksgiving night at Lambeau Field. It's going to be coming up with that receiving core. Essentially the guys at the top of that receiving core, Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and a quarterback like Tua. Miami just feels like a team that can play this rope-a-dope game where you can bottle them up, you can hold them down, you can think you've got control of things, and the next thing you know, Tyreek Hill is catching a pass and running 80 yards for a touchdown and completely changing a game. I felt like the Jacksonville Jaguars felt pretty good about where they were in that game, and then all of a sudden Tua and Tyreek land a haymaker, and then things had suddenly shifted, and the Dolphins have the ability to do that against anybody. On the other side, the Bills, kind of a new receiving core. They're trying to figure some things out on offense. They still have Josh Allen, obviously, but a lot of transition going on in Buffalo, and they fell behind early to Arizona and then just came roaring back.
More than any other year, I think this really is going to be on Josh Allen's plate. They've had some pretty big changes, especially on the defensive side of the ball in Buffalo. And Josh Allen is the constant. That's the guy that they've been trying to make this jump, trying to make this leap. And in some ways, it kind of felt like this year's a little bit of a reset for the Bills, trying to see if they can kind of regather the troops to make a run here. But certainly going up into Miami is going to be a huge matchup right off the bat for them. Yeah.
On Sunday, very interesting here, 4 matchups on Sunday that pit NFC versus NFC, and where both teams are 1-0. Heading into Week 2. And I'll just rattle them off here for you, and I'll let you comment on what you feel is worthwhile. New Orleans is at Dallas. Tampa Bay is at Detroit. San Francisco is at Minnesota. And Chicago is at Houston. 4 matchups, NFC versus NFC. All those teams are 1-0. It's kind of interesting the way that all fell.
It did, and Tampa-Detroit is probably my game of the week because one of those teams, assuming there isn't a tie, one of those teams going to 2-0 is going to be really big for their season. Because when you look at the Buccaneers, there was a lot of people out there like, hey, Kirk Cousins is in Atlanta. Falcons, they put a lot of resources in. They signed a lot of veterans. They're trying to make something happen this year. Whereas Tampa Bay, it's like, okay, they're sticking with Baker. What can they do with him? And now they come out the gate looking great. Baker Mayfield looked exceptional last week. Watching Mayfield play the way that he did in that game in contrast to everything that was happening in Cleveland. Again, one situation is not like the other, but just seeing how he's remade himself, going from a guy that was a plug-and-play starter with the Rams a couple of years ago to a dude that now led Buccaneers to the playoffs and appears to be the next guy in Tampa after the transition from Tom Brady. Now he's going to be going up against a challenging Detroit defense. And on the other side of it, the Lions had to outlast, that opener and seeing exactly what they have going up against Tampa Bay. I think that's a huge litmus test for both those teams. And if one of them gets to 2-0, you talk about trying to prove what they did last year is no fluke. Well, they're off to a good start.
Yeah, and Tampa Bay going back to Detroit just 8 months after they were there for a playoff game. That's an NFC playoff rematch in that one. San Francisco at Minnesota, it's easy to forget because of how everything kind of spiraled downhill for the Vikings last year after the Kirk Cousins injury. But the Minnesota Vikings beat the San Francisco 49ers at US Bank Stadium in the early stages of last season. So, the 49ers certainly remember that. And I'll be really curious.
Sam Darnold starting against the 49ers.
That's right.
That's another interesting.
There's having been with the Niners last year as a backup.
Yeah, he was one of the reasons why the Niners were kind of able to keep this thing going while Brock Purdy was out. So, yeah, credit to him.
I'll be interested to see with the Bears now, Caleb Williams going from game 1 to game 2. Tough matchup for them going down to Houston. A lot of excitement about the Houston Texans with Stroud and that team, and they're coming off of a week 1 division victory, and they were, the surprise team to make the playoffs in the AFC last year. So that'll be another fun one, 1-0 versus 1-0. But the one that is squarely on our radar is two teams that are trying to avoid going to 0-2 in the Colts and the Packers, and that will be a Sunday noon kickoff. You ready for some noon football?
Ready for some noon football at Lambeau Field. A couple guys were asked about that's the traditional TV questions that get asked about, hey, how excited. You can tell. They got the one preseason game at Lambeau, but they've been on the road quite a bit. And now being able to actually get this feeling, get this start, unfortunately, looks like it potentially won't be Jordan Love running out of the tunnel first for the Packers, but still, I just think any Sunday at Lambeau Field, especially when you get those noon kickoffs, you get the smell of brats in the air, you can't beat it in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
Yeah, it should be a good day. Well, with that, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team and everything with regard to Sunday's home opener at Lambeau Field. We'll have it all for you on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.